The family Drago seeks to break the family creed once again. Will Adonis succeed where Apollo failed? Find out when Johnnie Torch reviews Creed 2. Well, welcome everybody to another live edition of Johnnie Torch Live. This is not exactly a live broadcast, but we are going to be talking about Creed 2 today. If you've seen the film, let me know what you think about in the comments below. We're going to start off with a little non-spoiler review. We're going to just go over it briefly, and I'll let you know what I think. And then after that, we will get deep into spoilers. So I'll give you a fair spoiler warning before we get into it. All right, so to start off, the premise of the film, of course, is a sequel, more or less, not only to Creed, the original film, but to Rocky IV, where Ivan Drago killed Apollo Creed in the ring. Rocky failed to throw the towel. Again, I'll interject here for a moment. I don't think Rocky is too much to blame. Obviously, he could have thrown the towel, but it didn't seem to me like Ivan Drago was going to stop beating on Apollo Creed no matter what happened. He literally threw the referee across the ring. And also, Apollo vehemently protested any thought of stopping the fight. And you have to understand, Rocky's a boxer. He's told Mickey not to stop the fight several times in his fights with Apollo, so obviously he respects that. But to carry on, Rocky ended up fighting Drago in Russia, beating him. Drago was pretty much an outcast in Russia, losing his family, losing his respect by his peers. And now that his son is old enough to take up the mantle of the boxing Drago, he takes him to America to challenge Adonis Creed, who, of course, is the son of Apollo Creed, to another Drago Creed match. Now, I'll have to say very off the bat that this film is an improvement over Creed. I liked the first Creed. I thought it was very good, but it had a lot of writing issues that I wasn't crazy about. They had some problems, and I'll get into most of them in the spoiler review because I think this film addresses all the deficiencies of Creed 1 and improves upon the concept and fixes the little things that nagged at me about Creed being a long-term Rocky fan of the franchise. Uh, this film has a lot of action. It has a lot of heart, and it's a faithful, you know, I think it tells basically what would most likely happen after Rocky IV for Drago, and in the situation, what would be the likely outcome. Had his son been a boxer and Apollo's son being a boxer, this is the inevitable outcome. Um, so without spoiling it, I guess that's about all I could say without getting into detail. So I'm gonna say, yeah, go ahead and see it. Make sure you see this film. I'm sure you'd enjoy it if you're a fan of the Rocky franchise. Of course, this one was written by Stallone, so if anybody's going to get that feeling of the Rocky franchise right, it's going to be him. A lot of people I've heard that are critics are basically saying the same thing, that this has that old Rocky film feel. And so if you're a diehard of the original Rocky series, you're going to like this one. I think if you were more coming from the first Creed film and your interest in this is based on what you've seen in Creed, maybe not so much. I'm not sure. The biggest complaint seems to be from critics that it's formulaic in the sense, in the style of the old Rocky films and how they were formulaic to an extent. I don't find that as a problem. If you want to match that against, like, say, for instance, The Last Jedi, and you're forced to have to defy expectations at every turn, it's not a very satisfying outcome. You can kind of see what's going to happen in this film fairly early on. There's not a lot of surprises, but there's something much more satisfying in that than just trying to subvert expectations for the sake of subverting expectations. So I think it's very successful in doing what it set out to do, to sort of be a crowd pleaser the way that the original franchise of Rocky films were. It was basically to be a crowd pleaser and not to really, sort of defy convention. This is basically a continuing of that trend, of that style of filmmaking. So, once again, yeah, if you want the spoiler-free review, a lot of action, a lot of heart, very enjoyable, and a worthy successor in the Rocky franchise. All right, now we're going to get into the spoilers now. So we're going to talk about the entirety of the movie and get into every detail. So if you don't want to hear any more of this until you've actually seen the film, you've been spoiler warned. Okay, so the first thing that happens here that's very interesting is Adonis challenges again for the title. Now this is pretty interesting because um, I'm trying to remember the name of his first opponent in Creed. I think it was Ricky Conlon, I believe. And we're going to talk a little bit about Creed 1 because as it relates to Creed 2, because I think I did a brief review of it somewhere. I'm not sure, in one of my live broadcasts, one of my Torch News roundups probably. But I never really gave my full feelings on that film, and I think this is probably the place to do it in comparison, and why I think this film is a better film. So Ricky Conlon was going to jail because of some kind of felony assault or something, and he had to have one last fight. And his one last fight was supposed to be against um, Andre Ward. I know played the fighter because he's a real boxer in real life. Let me see if I can look up fast who he played. Danny Stunt. Let me see. Danny Stuntman Wheeler. So that is the champion because Conlon vacated the title. So Adonis challenges now Andre Ward for the title, and that was a little unexpected. I didn't know if they were going to actually have him go for the title in this film. That would have probably saved something for the sequel, because you know Adonis was basically climbing the ranks in Creed, and he got sort of a shot in the same way Rocky did, just because the champion needed an opponent. So in this case, he fights for the title, and that's where we see this scene here on the screen. And he ends up beating the champion and becomes the world champion. So it was good that we got a couple of fights in this film. We've got three to be exact, and this was cool to start off the movie with a fight. Not too many Rocky films do that, barring the flashback scenes of the previous film. Only a couple have. I think the original Rocky, and I think that's the only one that comes to mind. But so then we have some humorous stuff here where Adonis wants to propose to Bianca, of course, Tessa Thompson, the lovely Tessa Thompson. And I thought that was a funny scene. Rocky evokes the proposal that he did in Rocky 2 to Adrian. So this film, if you want to compare it, it was sort of like the greatest hits of all the Rocky films. I think you had some of the domestic stuff from Rocky 2, where he and Bianca find that they're expecting, and the pratfalls and pitfalls that come from domestic life. I think that was something that was injected from Rocky 2. We've got some of Rocky 3 in here, where Adonis ends up fighting Victor Drago, and losing the first time because he isn't ready, doesn't have his head in the game, doesn't quite have the eye of the tiger, so to speak, and has to rematch him later on for the victory in the second fight. And much like Rocky 4, of course, we have sort of the big brutish antagonist who is much more of a physical danger than the protagonist has ever fought before. So already we have sort of a good blend of all the Rocky sequels having a little something to say in this film. All right, so we'll take these subjects a little bit at a time. So uh, uh, we had the promoter. There was a black promoter. Now, this is one of the things that wasn't addressed that I still would like them to address in the Creed series, which is when I first saw the Black Promoter watching Drago and everything, I thought maybe he was going to be Adonis' brother. Because as you remember in Rocky 2, we actually see his two children. And we know he has at least two with Marianne Creed. And we are never told anything about his other son and daughter. I was curious if maybe that's where they were going with that because the actor playing the promoter was maybe 5 to 10 years older than Adonis, which would have fit the narrative. But we still don't know anything about them. We have not heard anything. Their names are never mentioned. They're not talked about. And that is something that I would like to see explored a little bit. But again, there's only so much room you can have for the domestic stuff. And I think this film actually slows down somewhat in the middle with the domestic stuff. If there's any flaws, and there are very few, I think the middle of the film stalls a bit too much. This is at the point when the baby's born and Adonis is training and so forth. It's a little bit slow there. That's probably the main complaint. I think my other complaint would be that it doesn't feel very complete. There are a lot of issues that seem to be left on the cutting room floor. Like, I think there were a lot more scenes that could have been mined for drama and for, interest. Now, Rocky says he's not going to train Adonis, and we don't really get too much of an interplay between them. They just have the conversation and it's over. And I like the fact that they go back to the death of Apollo, and that's pretty much the reason why. It's very understated. It's very understated. Then we have the confrontation, of course, between Rocky and Drago, which is what we were all waiting for, to see them confront each other for the first time in 30 odd years. And that scene is electric. That scene is probably the best scene Stallone has played with anybody in forever. Because he hasn't had an antagonist really since Drago. I mean, he had Tommy Gunn, of course, which wasn't a really great film, and he had Mason the Lion Dixon, who was not really an antagonist. I mean, he did some trash talking, but he wasn't really, the full-on heel of an Ivan Drago. So they meet up. He's in Adrian's, and Rocky comes in, and they have this great conversation. And Drago's like, "There are no pictures of me on the wall," and Rocky's like, "No, they're not," because obviously, Drago killed his best friend. He's not going to be having pictures of him on the wall. So that was an amusing exchange, but I felt that there could have been another exchange between them, and the film seems to go out of their way to not put them two together again. So that was something I was disappointed in. I thought at one point they should have another conversation or something, particularly before the second fight, because when the rematch happens, there is absolutely no contact between them at all. And in the first matchup, when Rocky's not present because he's not training Adonis, uh, Ivan Drago kind of goads Adonis by saying, you're much shorter than your father was, and starts a little scuffle on the stage during the weigh-in, and that's typically how it goes. And I kind of expected something like that again before the second fight, but they go straight to the second fight. There's no weigh-in, there's no press conference, and I think there was kind of a wasted opportunity there to have another confrontation between them. And again, at the end of the fight, at the end of the second fight between Adonis and Victor, there is nothing said between Rocky and Drago. So while what they gave us was gold, I really expected just a little bit more. I think they could have given us at least one more scene, and that probably would have been really powerful. And it would have been something else to put in the Rocky highlight reel. But they give us one, and I guess it'll have to do. Another thing, and this is something that goes back to the first Creed film, is in the first Creed film, it's established that Rocky hasn't contacted Marianne Creed, of course, once again played by Felissa Rashad. She was played by Sylvia Means, I believe is the name of the actress in the original Rocky franchise. But sometimes recasts are okay. I mean, that wasn't a big issue to me. I mean, the girl that played Little Marie was recast, and I think that was for the better as well. But it was already established in Creed that Rocky hadn't talked to Marianne since the funeral, Apollo's funeral. And this is like some 30 odd years now. And you would think that would be something that would be addressed in this film, and that would be mined again for some drama, and another good Rocky scene would come of it. But Rocky shows up at Marianne's house and talks to Adonis and gets him back on track, all without ever having that conversation with Marianne Creed. And later on, they do share a scene together with the birth of their Adonis' daughter. And at that point, it's like all's forgotten. And it just seems to me like there was probably a scene filmed, or if there wasn't, there certainly should have been, that was removed. And I feel like a lot of this film is like that. It's not a short film by any means. I believe it's like 2 hours and 10 minutes. And it doesn't feel short, like you've been shortchanged of a story or something. Because sometimes that can be the feeling when you get a 90-minute film and you feel like, gee, they really hacked this thing up just to get it out there. That's not the case at all with Creed 2. But it does feel like they leave a lot of important scenes and moments on the fringes that are either on the cutting room floor, or maybe they're implied, but they're not actively sought out to bring to the forefront. So again, those are probably the only criticisms, and I'll get them out of the way right now, that they could have fleshed out a little bit more of some of the relationships, and some of the things that went on could have been focused on a little bit more. And maybe a little bit of a second act slog, a little bit slow in the second act. Although, of course, you have to give some time in the second act, because you can't just have him fighting, losing, and then jumping right into the rematch. Then there has to be a healing. There has to be he has to seek redemption, and that is all handled very well. But I do think that it goes by a bit slowly. Okay, so the first fight with Victor Drago, Adonis is completely overwhelmed, knocked out, and we get to see a real up close look at what the damage the Dragos do to their opponents. Because from what we've seen so far from the Dragos in these films, we see Apollo getting killed, obviously. We see Rocky getting beaten so badly that he gets brain damage that is obviously not as severe as it was originally diagnosed, but he does have some residual after effects from that. As he says in the film, he says, he broke things in me that can't never be fixed. And of course, we see that Victor is, the apple hasn't fallen far from the tree. He's a big bruiser, and he fractures ribs and damages Adonis' kidney, and a very serious and brutal beating he receives at the hands of Victor. After this, it's really interesting, and this is something else that I felt also could have been focused on, but I think they probably did enough, which is to flesh out the Drago family. Now, in the meeting between Rocky and Drago, Drago talks about how he lost his wife, and he lost his respect from his country, and he moved to Ukraine. And then there's like a party after he beats Adonis, Victor, and this was what surprised me the most, which was they actually got Bridget Nielsen back to play the wife of Ivan. I can't remember her name in the movie, but she comes back again, and there is an undertone that she only surfaces when the Dragos are winning. And so now that Victor's winning again, she comes back into their lives. And it's very touching, because Victor is very conflicted by this, it seems. And let me see the actor's name. Let me check this out. The actor's name is Florian Montu. That's how I'm going to pronounce it anyway. Of course, he's actually a boxer. I think he's a mixed martial arts. I'm not sure. But yeah, so he did a very good job. So he wasn't, he wasn't an actor per se before this, but he does a very good job here, giving a performance where he's very upset at the way Ivan has been treated, and the way that his wife and his mother, I should say, has treated Ivan. And Ivan comes right out to him and says, "I lost. I lost. They have every right to treat me like this because I'm not a winner." And he puts it on Victor to say, "You're the winner. You're the one that won. You're the one that's going to win the belt when he comes back," Adonis. Now, of course, that's another thing. Adonis actually doesn't lose because Victor hits him when he's down, when he's on a knee. And so, of course, that disqualifies him from the match. But he's still seen as a winner in the eyes of, obviously, the Russian people. And they're still cheering for him in the rematch. So I also thought it was good that they brought back from the first movie, again, let me see the name of this actor, Wood Harris, who plays Little Duke Evers. And he is the son of Duke, who was the trainer of Apollo in the original franchise. Of course, he trained Rocky, he co-trained Rocky in Rocky 3 with Apollo, and then he trained Rocky in Rocky 4, has a cameo in 5, and then, of course, he trains Rocky in Rocky Balboa. So it's nice to see that they acknowledge Tony Burton, who, of course, played the original Tony Duke Evers, and that his memory isn't forgotten. Of course, he had that cameo or brief role in the original Creed, but Adonis turns to him in this film to train him for the first bout, and it's good to see that he sticks around this time. He goes with Rocky to train Adonis during the second training, leading up to the second match. So I thought that was pretty cool to see some respect given to Tony Burton's character. So Rocky and Adonis are on the outs. This is where I'm going to talk a little bit about the first Creed, and I think the deficiencies in the first Creed. And I'm jumping all over the place here, but this is a live review. So in the original Creed, one of the things I didn't like about Creed, and there was two things. One of them was the writing was very manipulative, and that is the one thing I don't forgive in writing, is when it's manipulative. In other words, when the writer wants you to feel a certain way and they inject some drama that is forced. And I particularly think in Creed, where they have that brief flare up between Adonis and Rocky, where Rocky finds out that he's got cancer and he doesn't want to train Creed anymore. And he basically says, "We're not family. I'm just an old trainer and you're a young prospect." That's not something Rocky would say. Now, to their credit, Ryan Coogler, I guess, is the one that wrote that film, so he had to be responsible for that. To his credit, Rocky sort of, regrets it the minute he says it. And he is seen sort of agonizing over the fact that he said something that he can't take back, but he knows is not the case. But seeing as how I don't think Rocky would say that, it still comes off feeling manufactured, like they needed to have some kind of conflict between them. And of course, Adonis goes, to jail for punching the Bianca's music director or whatever he was. But and they have some words, and it's sort of, I think what the intent was with that scene was sort of the conflicts that were between Mickey and Rocky in the original Rocky, where Rocky had some resentment toward Mickey, and you know they had to sort of hash out Adonis' resentment toward Rocky, but that really felt manufactured, didn't feel right. In this film, it's more understandable. Adonis is really in bad shape. I mean, he's put in the hospital in the worst way. And he's obviously angry with Rocky for not training him and getting him ready for this. And, the sort of the backstory as well of what Apollo went through fighting the original fight between he and Drago. There's a lot of baggage there. And this was the place to do that. They didn't need to do that in the first Creed, and yet they did anyway. Other things to compare this film to Creed, I'm glad they completely got past Rocky having cancer. I didn't want to see Rocky deteriorate through all the Creed films. Uh, Sylvester Stallone has said when he was on set doing this, and he released this on Instagram. But when he was on set, he said that this is probably his last rodeo as Rocky. Now, he said this before, of course. He wanted to quit the gig after Rocky 5. He thought Rocky Balboa was the final film, and then he was brought back for Creed, and then he wrote Creed 2. So I think he's out of ideas probably at this point and just wants to go out on a high note, because this film is basically a high note on the Rocky series, and it's not the low note of Rocky 5. And to be honest with you, I think Creed was probably not the best place to leave the franchise. So if there is no Creed 3, I think they have it pretty much with a good chapter ending. But as I was saying, one of the things is that they corrected here was also yeah, I lost my train of thought on that one. That might come back, but they also in the conversation about the drama, the forced drama, I felt like in Creed they also forced the character of Robert Balboa. They forced him out of the story basically to make room for Creed, because Rocky really had nobody at the point that Creed meets him. Now, it was a very interesting and creative way to get the Rocky franchise to continue, because we all knew that Robert wasn't going to continue as a boxer, and his son, having Rocky's son follow in his father's footsteps. It didn't seem like he was that type. So having Apollo's son step in made the most sense in the world. But they had to frame it in such a way that Rocky had nobody. Now, he still had a living relative. He had Robert, because, of course, at this point, Paulie had already died. And Paulie was his last remaining, friend from the old days. And then they made this a subplot in this film where Robert is estranged from Rocky again. And they dealt with it here and finally resolved it, because it did feel like a forced, manipulated concept for Creed. That Robert, who seemed to finally be on the same page with Rocky and Rocky Balboa, is estranged from him again 10 years later in Creed. Doesn't make the most sense. And they just kind of had it that, well, the only explanation was that distance causes estrangement, and Rocky really is kind of embarrassed to pick up the phone, and for whatever reason Robert doesn't want to pick up the phone, and they don't visit, they don't communicate, and so forth. So that was a nice subplot to put in this one to correct another fundamental flaw of Creed, which was the broken relationship between Rocky and Robert. And they do get back the original actor Mila Vimalti. I can't pronounce his name, but they get the original actor back to play Robert again for a brief scene at the end when Rocky sees his grandson for the first time. I don't think they mentioned him by name, but that was a good scene too, where Rocky is seen as a grandfather now. It's really touching. So again, yeah, we have the birth of Adonis' daughter, Amira, I think her name was. That was kind of funny scene when Rocky's saying, you could call her Kate. That was pretty funny. There wasn't a whole lot of laughs in this film. Same with Creed, I guess, although that was more of just sort of, I think, by necessity for the first film. This film probably could have benefited from a couple of laughs, but the family drama was pretty good. It was handled pretty well. We get to see a little bit more about Bianca trying to, chase her dreams of being a singer and a musician, I guess, also. So then we also get this sort of the dramatic touch there where the baby has Bianca's genetic hearing loss. And this is something that they kind of also left on the cutting room floor. They left it fairly ambiguous that they might go back to it and maybe address whether the baby is completely deaf, or whether she will be in time, or whether this can be reversed. We really don't know. And I have a feeling that's probably more something that they would attempt to disclose in a Creed 3. We'll talk more about what I think about Creed 3 in a moment, but um, that's kind of left hanging. And like I said, I think that there could be a couple of things in the cutting room floor that would flesh out a little more about what was happening in the fringes of this movie, because it is a fairly busy movie. All right, so getting back to the narrative here, Little Duke tries to get Creed into the ring because he needs to fight if he's gonna keep his title, because it'll be vacated if he doesn't defend it. Rocky ends up making up with Adonis, and in true fashion, they get back in the swing of things. And Drago insists on fighting him in Russia, which is like a fitting callback to Rocky 4. And Rocky, instead of taking him to Siberia to train, which is where, he trained for the match with Drago, it's a nice opposite, parallel, where he's training in like a Arizona desert or a New Mexico desert or something, where there's some real tough guys that are just living in a shack and out there in the blazing heat, and they're, digging ditches, punching tires. There's no punching bags. And Rocky trains Adonis the right way this time. And he, there's a nice montage. Again, as a side journey here, part of the problem is with this film also, if you want to call it a minor gripe I have, is the music really wasn't that great. Part of the great things about Rocky is the musical choices. The Creed choices are not that great. Now, it's probably down to the fact that, of course, it's all rap because, well, Adonis is black, and he's probably going to choose rap over 80s pop, synth rock. But, there is no Burning Heart. There's no Eye of the Tiger. There's no Hearts on Fire, which I would have loved to hear at least one of those played. I mean, they could have like updated it the way that sort of a rap sample version of it, so to speak. That would have been cool. I would have liked that of one of those songs. They do play a sort of a selection of "Gonna Fly Now," "Going the Distance" in the second Drago fight, which we'll get to very soon. But as far as the montages and stuff like that are concerned, the music is not memorable, and I don't think, apart from "Gonna Fly Now" in Rocky Balboa, I don't think we've had any good Rocky theme songs since Rocky 4, where we had all those songs. We had the training montage song. We had, from Vince DiCola. There's nothing really since then that has been memorable in the Rocky films. I mean, even in the earlier films, when we didn't exactly have songs, we had great score pieces like Redemption and Rocky 2, and, obviously Gonna Fly Now and Rocky 1. So that could have been better. Um, Speaking of Gonna Fly Now, I thought that was a great scene also, where in every Rocky film, I think except Rocky 4, Rocky either runs or walks up those steps, the Rocky steps to the Philadelphia Art Museum. And this is the first film, apart from Rocky 4, where he doesn't climb those steps, but both Dragos do. And it's a really cool and perverse moment where they're climbing the steps. They're looking at the Rocky statue, and all the spectators are there taking pictures with the Rocky statue, and they're there witnessing it. I thought that was a great moment, and sort of a perverse inverse of the Rocky staple. That was pretty cool. All right, so we get to the training, and again, some real great stuff. It reminded me also of, Mickey's chase the chicken moment, which they already redid in the first Creed. This is between Adonis and some other tough guy, where they put both feet in a tire, and it's sort of like fighting in a phone booth. And whoever takes their foot out of the tire first obviously loses. And of course, Adonis can't do it at first. Eventually, he does. Adonis passes out while he's jogging behind the car while Rocky's jogging, and all the while, Drago's doing his training in Russia and doing sort of much the state of the art type training that Ivan did back in Rocky 4, although no steroids this time, steroid free. So, because this one was for the title, so they couldn't fudge any of that that funny business. So he completes the training, and yeah, that was pretty cool. That was much better than that was much better than the training scenes in Creed, where it was that weird running down the street and the motorbikes are like circling him while Rocky's looking out the window. I didn't get that at all. I don't understand what that meant. It was very weird. But anyhow, the training in this scene and in this film was particularly good. I thought it was very effective. So basically, Adonis just needed Rocky in his corner to get him focused. He's not fighting for his father, and he's not necessarily fighting because he hates the Dragos. He's fighting for himself because he has to do what he has to do. He has to basically take that Rocky step, which is to fight because he's a fighter. And it's nice to see that Rocky sort of imparts that message to him and he understands it. And I think that's what turns the corner for him. That's what gets him the eye of the tiger, so to speak. And I really wish they would have had either Stallone mention it or maybe just Michael B. Jordan could have said it. But seeing as how that was like a catchphrase of Apollo's, you would think it would come into play in the life story of his son here. That would have been interesting. But in any event, so the fight is on, and Adonis is all, he's focused, he's all set, and Rocky's in his corner. Again, there isn't really any more communication between Rocky and Drago. But the fight is set, the fight is on, and Victor Drago is coming at him, basically trying to bruise him like before. They did have Ivan Drago say the famous "break him" line. He still refers to his enemies as breaking them, and he's like tells him, "You broke him before, break him again." And it's pretty interesting. It sort of parallels Rocky 4 in a bit, where he kind of summons his courage and bashes Victor Drago's face, cutting him, and the fight becomes a little more even. Another place where I think this film is more successful than Creed is Rocky actually gives him some good advice in the corner. He was sort of giving him Yoda platitudes in the first film, I thought, which Rocky does very well. It's not like that's something that should be exempt from the character, but he was basically like telling him, take one step at a time, all the pain you have, let out. That's good stuff, but he's not giving him actual constructive, you know, information there that could help him. And in this film, he does basically tell him, like he's baiting you, stick the left in there, and counter with a right. You saying your old man did that to me and it worked. It was really cool in this film that you could see that Rocky has smarts from fighting, and that's what Adonis needs, is to have this kind of skill and information passed on to him during the fight. This is what helps him win. And it's important that Rocky is the one that imparts this to him and helps him win. I mean, it might make little Duke look bad, but this is the reason why Creed exists, because of Rocky. It's a Rocky film in most aspects. So Rocky has to be the one to impart this winning knowledge to Adonis. Now, this is an interesting turn here where, Ivan sort of has a John Kreese moment where he's sort of like, you know, telling Victor to foul, basically, to foul Adonis. And it's an interesting thing to see the Dragos being so underhanded and basically, cheaters. I mean, Victor was disqualified the first time. And one has to wonder if Ivan was disqualified in his fight, because he basically threw the referee across the room, But it's interesting that that's what was chosen to do here, because it seems like Victor didn't need to do that, but Ivan seemed to be the type that would tell him to do that. So he ends up again injuring Adonis' ribs severely, and Adonis goes down a couple of times, which is again a great scene in true Rocky fashion, where you have to get off the canvas a couple of times. And this is the interesting moment in the film where Rocky could throw the towel because he knows that Adonis is fading, his body's taking too much punishment. But again, it's very understated, where Rocky basically just tells him, "Do you want me to stop it?" And Adonis doesn't even really say anything, but Rocky understands and says, "I didn't think you did." So it's interesting. Rocky's not going to stop the fight on Adonis the same way he didn't stop the fight for Apollo, even though in both cases their lives are both very much in danger. I mean, Adonis really has to do something here, otherwise he's going to get pummeled into oblivion again, worse than he did the first time. But they don't really put this thought across with a lot of platitudes. They just, Rocky understands. Rocky understands with Adonis the way Rocky understood with Apollo. A fighter's got to do what a fighter's got to do. He's got to get in there and do it on his own terms, because he himself was in that position, Rocky. He was himself in that position where he could have had it stopped, both in Rocky 1 and Rocky 2, for the abuse he was taking. He probably could have had it stopped in Rocky 4 too, but Duke didn't even, make that offer to him. So in the final round here, the consensus was that they weren't going to get the decision because they were in the Russian backyard, and he wasn't probably going to get a fair decision, Adonis, and the thought was that they had to knock him out. So I think it's the eighth round where Adonis ends up summoning up his strength, his reserves of strength, and pummels Victor mercilessly. And in an interesting turn, once Victor goes down, Victor's mother, Brigitte Nielsen, leaves because she's only there with them when they're winners, the Dragos. So while he gets back up, Victor, he is just not the same, and he's getting pummeled. And Ivan knows this, and so Ivan is the one that throws the towel. I could kind of see it happening, as he was like mulling it over in his mind. I said he's going to throw the towel. So it's kind of like, it's something that works if you've seen Rocky 4. That's why this is the perfect sequel to Rocky 4. It's the perfect companion because they don't spell anything out for you, but you have to understand that, you know, Ivan doesn't want to have happen to Victor what Ivan did to Adonis' father. So he's caring more about his son than, his son cares about his own safety. And it's sort of the same thing that happened in reverse. And he's not going to allow that to happen to Victor. So, yeah, like I said, it works out so well, but they don't spell it out for you. You have to have understood Rocky 4 in order to understand this one to a great extent, I believe. And so that's why it's the perfect sequel. Watching these two films back to back would really, you know, be a full picture. All right, so once again, the film ends. The towel's thrown. Adonis wins. Rocky takes a back step, which I don't really understand. I think the thought is that maybe he was going to get too much credit or something. I don't know what he was thinking, but he doesn't even get in the ring. It's kind of a strange moment, to be honest. I think this is probably Stallone trying to say, as I said before, that he's thinking this is his last film and he's going to step away. And that was supposedly symbolic of that. I don't know if it works. It doesn't particularly work, in my opinion. But he steps away. And of course, the film ends, as I said, with Rocky reconnecting with Robert and Adonis for the first time going to his father's grave and bringing Bianca and Amara, I believe was her name, the baby. And the baby's so cute. and they end it on a real nice note. Like I said, if this is the last Rocky film, the last film of the Rocky franchise, I can see it being a good ending chapter. I kind of and the people I went to the movie with also was suggesting that maybe they could have had a flashback with Apollo, with Carl Weathers, when Adonis was in trouble in the ring. But it's difficult because Carl Weathers is aged, and obviously Apollo died at the age of like 40 or something. So it's not going to be that easy to bring in a flashback or a thought or something like that in his mind when, like, for instance, Burgess Meredith was a few years older than when his character passed on, but obviously he didn't look that different. So that could have been something they could have done, but I think it was probably for the best they didn't. So what do I think of Creed 3? Should there be one? Let's take a brief look at that. I don't know. Stallone doesn't want to do another one apparently. I don't want them to kill Rocky off. So in a way, if they just let this be the last one, we don't have to see the death of Rocky, which would be cool. We end him on a happy note. And again, we pretty much left Adonis on a happy note. He's still a champion. The only thing that isn't addressed is whether if the baby's going to be deaf or not. They could, tell more of that story. Bianca losing her hearing, could they tell that story? It's sort of a story that doesn't have a happy ending, though. So I really don't know where they go with that because they would just have to have her signing, or I guess more accurately, Adonis would have to be signing to her. She would have to give up her musical career. It's just, I don't really know what they could do with the domestic side in Creed 3. As far as, antagonists, everybody wants to see Clubber Lang Jr. That would probably be the most exciting opponent, another trash talker. Because the Dragos are the strong silent type. They don't really talk trash. So if there is another opponent that you're going to bring back from the past, it would of course have to be Mr. T and Clever Lang Jr. I don't think Mason the Line Dixon Jr. is going to work, or Tommy Gunn Jr. So that's probably the last step that they could do. I don't know if they would do it because it would. This film already pulled all the strings that would work by using the son of the antagonist and son of the protagonist, and I don't really know if they could pull those strings effectively again to do uh Lang Jr. But again, I think that would be the only thing that could top seeing Adonis versus Drago, would be to see Adonis versus Lang. That would probably be cool. And I don't know if they'll do it though. All right, so trying to think. Let me see. Well, we might do a ranking video, so I don't know if I'm going to rank this right this moment. I would say it's definitely better than Rocky 5. It's better than Creed. Um, I don't know if I want to put it above Rocky 2 because that's the next one in my bottom 3. It might be better than Rocky 2, but then again, you got to remember Rocky 2 had some great scenes with Burgess Meredith. There was a great rapport between Burgess Meredith and Stallone in that film. So it would probably be, I would say, dead even with that one. Because again, that film didn't have that many laughs either. This one is all, very dramatic, and there isn't a lot of, but it's very strong in its, like I said, it's part of the franchise. It's epic in the sense that it builds on what's come before. That kind of is what its strength is. It really wouldn't work on its own, I think, quite as well. All right, so I am going to give Creed 2 4.5 stars out of 5. That's 4.5 stars out of 5 for Creed 2. Like I said, I think the only little complaints I have there is I think maybe a little bit of a slow second act, and I think a lot of the other character moments could have been fleshed out a bit more. Just a little maybe. But yeah, anyway, it's a great film. I think it's a worthy addition to the franchise. I think you should check it out. Make sure you see it if you're a Rocky fan. And thank you for joining me once again for another Johnnie Torch Live number 125 today. here on Johnnie Torch Reviews, and we are going to try to see if we can get some more videos out to you as soon as possible, probably with another Torch News Roundup in your future coming up. Until next we meet once again, this is Johnnie Torch reminding you, keep the flame burning brightly, and I'll be with you again real soon.